Good afternoon, everyone. This is Alesa Loftus, and I'm here with Jimmie Ratliff. And today we're going to be talking about the independent living movement, how it began, and how it is still affecting our community of disabled today. So, first thing I'd like to ask you, Jimmie, is how did the IL movement begin?
So the IL movement actually began around 1962, and a lot of people attribute Ed Roberts, who was a severely disabled student who was going to the University of California, Berkeley, who began to advocate for rights so that he could successfully be a student and go to school there. And also other people attribute Justin Dart as one of the early founders of the IL movement. But the independent living movement in itself is kind of this multifaceted effort that's driven by individuals with disabilities. And at its core, it champions the idea that people with disabilities should have the autonomy to make choices about their own lives and fully participate in society. It also emphasizes that individuals with disabilities are the best judges of what they need for their own care, capabilities, needs, and those types of things.
Right, that's kind of what our motto here is, nothing about us without us.
Correct.
So, what were the movement's main goals when it emerged?
So the movement sought to kind of move away from a medical model of disability, and what that is it portrays individuals as patients in need of a cure, or that they need to be fixed. And a lot of individuals who had disabilities at that time began to take action, and through self-advocacy and even protesting. I mean, there are stories of individuals who chain themselves to buses to get transit offices to realize that there need to be lifts on buses so that they could utilize that. So they began doing this self-advocacy and protesting, and perceptions started to change, and many people began to realize that it wasn't necessarily a medical barrier that was causing individuals with disabilities to be successful. It was this society thought that an individual who had a disability couldn't do certain things, or wouldn't be able to complete certain things. So as that recognition that it was a societal barrier, the attitudes started to change, and a lot of the obstacles to inclusion and empowerment for people with disabilities started to disappear, or accommodations began to be made. And that's kind of where the grassroots of that started.
Okay, so how do individuals with disabilities benefit from the IL movement today?
Well, I think Dynamic Independence is a good example of that. We're a Center for Independent Living, and across the United States and in other countries, there's over 600 centers for independent living. And what we do is offer a variety of resources, as all of these other places do, like peer support and mentoring, skills training for independent living, advocacy for disability rights, information and referral services, and even assistance on transitions. So that's one of the main things, how people continue to benefit for that. And services from Centers for Independent Living, like ours, are free of charge. So individuals have this support anytime that they need it.
Right.
So it's a benefit there.
So the in employment, how does the independent living movement affect the employment circuit?
Okay, so the independent living movement fought for the right of people with disabilities to work, and it argued against the perception that a disability made folks kind of incapable of working, and that they were unemployable, that they couldn't complete a job just because they had a disability. And the movement aimed to kind of secure employment opportunities for people with disabilities, and that's both in public and private sectors. And we've been talking a few weeks ago, and then last week I think also about the idea of accommodations that are offered in workplaces or in public places, different things like that, and housing, and that's where those types of things really start to take hold. Those laws and things that are in place to help protect the employment rights of individuals with disabilities.
Right, and you mentioned the people chaining themselves to buses and that kind of thing. That would tie in more with like accessibility and transportation. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So the aisle movement also advocated for accessible public transportation. This enables people with disabilities to use things like buses and travel independently. A lot of that groundwork, of course, thanks to those who protest in this way. But those types of demonstrations really did highlight the need for wheelchair lifts and other accommodations on public transport at the time.
Okay. And how did it help with personal assistance?
Yeah, so the aisle movement emphasized personal autonomy and the right of people with disabilities to direct their own care. And I think that's very important because nobody knows more about what an individual with a disability needs than that individual who is living that. So you can say, oh, well, I would handle it this way, or this person should be able to do that, or they should be able to do this, but you never understand what barriers and obstacles people face. Even a lot of times more than just physically, it might be an invisible disability that people have, or where they may have something like depression or anxiety or
autism.
Even epilepsy, autism, diabetes, any of these types of things that might be sort of a barrier for people that have to get around or to get through. Yeah. And the goal of patients being able to direct their own care through this personal assistance that lets them decide what they want and who they want to have help them do those things to get through that. And that leads on to things like consumer-directed care, where the consumer is the boss of their care. They're telling, if they have home health come in, they're telling those home health people what to do. And it also allows them to live effectively and to be an integral part of the communities that they live in, and to assist others who may have a similar disability or something through peer support services and things like that.
It's like one of the things that we learned yesterday in the webinar that we were in was talking about a person letting you know what their dreams are, what their plans are that they would like to do, and I found that was, it was really inspiring. The young lady that we listened to, who said from the beginning that despite her disability, she was going to go to a particular college, and no matter what, she worked workarounds and found a way, and she finally did not only graduate from that college, and then she also is employed there now.
Yes. So
she really overcame her disability by having those things in place. But you mentioned in the beginning that the aisle movement was challenged the medical model. So how did that work?
So, like I said before, the medical model framed the disability as an illness, something that needed a cure. And the aisle movement really did push toward the idea that a disability is not a sickness per se. That is an artificial barrier or a misconstrued barrier that people often put into place. People see a person with a disability and they just assume that they can't function in a normal way, so to speak, sometimes. So, and that's completely false. There are so many individuals who live very productive, very giving lives. I mean, they have families, they have their own homes, they're living their dream, going to the schools that they want to. And if we hadn't have had people like Ed Roberts or Justin Dart, those folks who were there in the beginning and really pushing toward this independent living movement, disabilities would still be seen in the mind of that medical model as a sickness, as something that was taboo, that you can't do this because of this.
That kind of stigma.
Yeah, that kind of stigma. And so the transition from that medical model now lets people realize that with appropriate supports and accommodations, individuals with disabilities can continue to live very independently. And of course, that's our goal here.
And of course, that's always awesome. Now, it also influenced legislation in a lot of ways.
Sure. So we had the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. There's a section that's called 504, And what it does is it prohibits discrimination on the basis of a disability in programs receiving federal funding. So if you are a program, and it doesn't matter what type of program that you are, and you are receiving federal funds, you cannot say, well, we're not going to hire a person who has a disability, or our program is not available for a person who has a disability. There's zero discrimination that is allowed thanks to the Rehabilitation Act. Also, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, that's what you hear about most often, and it was enacted around 1990, and it's this comprehensive civil right law that extends protections against discriminations to the private sector. So even if you have an employer that's a private employer, it's not like a public employer, like a government or a municipality or something like that. But like, just kind of like the mom and pop stuff, they're not allowed to discriminate. It mandates accessibility in public accommodations like transport, telecommunications. It also laid forth a lot of the groundwork for the construction models that we have nowadays, making sure that places that you go into are accessible, that bathrooms meet a certain accessible requirement, or that hallways or slopes on sidewalks or curb cuts and all of these different things meet this certain criteria, parking spaces and accessibility aprons and things like that. So you have all of these different aspects that were kind of combined into the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it really was a very big push forward for accommodations and accessibility and inclusion.
The wonderful thing about both of those acts, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, pushing for inclusion, that's one of the reasons why our children with disabilities, when they're in the schools, they used to be segregated to one little portion of the school, and they were never allowed to interact with children that did not have disabilities. And it's one of the great things that our program that I work with, Leanne Pressler at Central Middle School, is helping to increase awareness of inclusion for people of all abilities. And then, the ADA and the inclusion, the Rehabilitation Act, both tie in with the service dogs and people being able to have that needed animal, that dog, to go in with them for whatever purpose, to assist them with their medical needs, whether it be retrieving something or alerting them to something. They now are able to go into any place that anyone else can go with that dog, just like if they had a wheelchair or a walker or whatever that is a piece of equipment. So that's two of my favorite parts about those things and how they've affected.
Because of this initial movement that took place or began back then, it's still in full force today, and it really is interesting how far that it has come. I mean, just you're looking at over a course of say 50 years. If you were to be a person with a disability 50 years ago, you were severely limited on what you would be able to accomplish, or what you'd be allowed to do, or what people would perceive that you could do, whether or not that was something that you felt that you could do. So there's been a lot of leaps and bounds that have happened to bring things better because of that initial movement, and to pass these types of legislations that make things better, and to change that public perception of what having a disability actually is and isn't, and that people can still be very, very productive and live a normal life. That's the goal, is for everybody to have the same rights and access and prerogative to live their life how they want, independently, with whatever supports that we need to have in place for that to happen. So it is really an amazing transformation, but it's something that's still ongoing, and it will continue to be ongoing because there are still so many places. Not too long ago, I heard of something that happened in the area where an individual with a service animal had gone in to a business, and they were told they couldn't have their service animal in there at all. Well, according to the ADA,
yes, they can.
they can. So I mean, there's still a lot of education that needs to be pushed out, but it's not something. It's not something that's falling on deaf ears like it used to. And there's still good folks at NICL, the National Council on Independent Living, and the Centers for Independent Living, and the ACL, and all of these places that are constantly pushing for more legislation that benefit inclusion and independence for individuals with disabilities. And it's a great thing, and I think we're very fortunate to be here and to be a part of pushing those types of ideas forward and helping individuals any way that we can through the services we have here.
Well, this has been really informative, and I appreciate you sharing your insights on the independent living movement.
Hey, you're welcome. It's so important to remember that, like I said, the IL movement is an ongoing process, and with continued advocacy and activism, we can make sure that we're achieving that full inclusion and equalities for all individuals.
Right, so that's the end of our information for right now, but if you have any questions or comments about the independent living movement and you would like to give us a call to talk about it, 918-335-1314. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any stories to share with us, we do plan on sometime in the future getting a collective of some maybe stories from Bartlesville or the surrounding areas particularly, that maybe we can share in how maybe someone that was around during the beginning of the IL movement or soon after has seen changes and experienced changes. We'd love to hear those stories. You can also email us, and that would be at aloftis@dynind.org or jrattliff@dynd.org. Jimmy's laughing because I had to remember how to spell his. But anyways, you can email us, and we will respond. Or you can even come by 1110 Southeast Frank Phillips Boulevard between 9 to 4 Monday through Friday, and we'd love to talk to you. So for now, we're going to sign off, and we'll see you next week.
See you next time, folks.
Have a great weekend.